At long last, a peek into the president's purse. A report released by the New York Times says Donald Trump paid just $750 in federal income tax in 2016 and 2017, and nothing over the previous decade, despite earning hundreds of millions of dollars from TV appearances, endorsements, and licensing deals. President Trump has denied the allegations, saying he'll be vindicated when his tax returns are made public.
It's fake news. It's totally fake news. Made up, fake. We went through the same stories. You could have asked me the same questions 4 years ago. I had to litigate this and talk about it. Totally fake news. No, actually, I paid tax, and you'll see that.
But so far, he hasn't shared this information, citing an ongoing audit by the Internal Revenue Service. That probe is looking into whether Trump was entitled to the $73 million tax rebate he received in 2008. If he wasn't, he could be ordered to pay at least $100 million in back taxes and penalties. There are also disparities between the income he's reported to different government agencies. In 2018, Trump declared earnings of $434 million as part of the presidential public financial disclosure, but reported a $47.4 million loss to the IRS. The New York Times alleges he's used a network of more than 500 companies to artificially inflate expenses and avoid taxes. These include payments of $70,000 to his hairdresser, $96,000 for his daughter's stylist, and a $210,000 photo shoot at one of his golf resorts. A lawyer for the Trump Organization says the president has paid millions of dollars in personal taxes over the years, but opponents have been quick to condemn Trump, with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer urging Americans to speak out if they've paid more in federal income tax than Trump has. And analysts say presidential candidate Joe Biden is pitching himself as a better representative of average Americans than his competitor.
What's really standing out is sort of this personal comparison that he's drawing between Biden, who grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then in Delaware, and Trump, who grew up in New York City with a wealthy real estate developer father and then has become a billionaire real estate developer, reality television star himself.
This message seems to be resonating with voters as Biden is enjoying leads over Trump in several opinion polls. And further focus on the money trail may completely derail President Trump's re-election bid. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
For more on this, Jeffrey Tucker joins us now from Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He is editorial director at the American Institute for Economic Research, and Kathryn Solon is a Democratic Party leader and member of Democrats Abroad. She joins us from Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcome to you both. Kathryn, if I could begin with you on the headline allegation that he paid just $750 in income tax in 2016 and 2017 and no income tax at all for 10 years. Isn't this just a moral crime rather than an actual crime? You could argue that Trump simply took advantage of tax loopholes that were really available to every other American. So why should voters care?
Is this only gaming the system? Is it manipulating the system? Is it lying? Is it cheating? Is it criminal? It has many components, legal, political, and national security. But what we know is that he's been saying one thing to the American people, another thing to the IRS, and another contradictory thing to banks and investors. So there is some lying going on somewhere, and there is definitely his trust, the American people trusting this president is degrading by the day, and that is adding. And that's where, that's where it gets very political, and that's where it's going to help people determine how they vote.
Okay, Jeffrey, this New York Times investigation is basically an October surprise that's come just a couple of days early. But in our previous discussions, you've argued that Donald Trump has the right to keep his tax returns and his tax affairs secret. But he argues that, in fact, he's paid millions of dollars in taxes. If he wants to prove it, why doesn't he just unveil his tax returns so we can just put this argument to bed?
Oscar, everything I say here I don't speak as a Trump partisan, right? But there is something outrageously political about what's going on here. And yes, this is the New York Times trying to pull an October surprise. When I read the story over the weekend, I had a sense of deja vu. And I looked back to 2016. I saw the New York Times had filed an almost identical report 4 years ago, screaming Trump doesn't pay taxes, and Trump just dismissed it and said, every good businessman tries to economize on tax payments. This is just using conventional corporate finance. And I don't think anything in this report that I read over the weekend adds anything new to what was already there in 2016, except that perhaps the New York Times was digging so deeply into the details of this that they were trying to find a smoking gun for the Russia connection, which the story admits they did not find. So I think everything else, the big headlines and the big whoop-to-do, it's really much ado about nothing. And Trump has paid millions in taxes and personal taxes, as his attorney said. There's no way you can be an American corporate global businessman like Trump and get away with not paying taxes. It's mythical. What we're looking about here is some very fancy corporate finance having to do with writing off losses against future tax liabilities. And that's really all it is. And any accountant will tell you this.
Okay, so Jeffrey, if that is just the case, then why shouldn't Trump just give us his tax returns, or give the people the tax returns, so we can finally put this matter to bed once and for all?
I think one of the reasons he hasn't done it is precisely because this kind of high-level corporate finance is too confusing to people and is too easily mischaracterized. Mm-hmm. One of the ways that Trump operates is he starts hundreds of companies all the time. Some of them work, and that's good. When they don't work, he writes off the losses against the tax liabilities. And most Americans have no familiarity with this level of corporate finance and can easily misconstrue the data exactly as the New York Times has done. So that's, I think, the reason he's kept it quiet. It makes sense to me.
Now, Kathryn, we know Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential candidate, hasn't weighed in on the New York Times investigation, but we know that Trump and Biden will be going head-to-head in the first presidential debate Tuesday evening US time. How should Joe Biden use these allegations to his advantage during the debate, but also during the wider campaign?
Yeah. Joe Biden doesn't need to interpret this for the American people, because what's different from now, 2020, from 4 years ago when these reports first came out, and actually there's more history of Trump's manipulation of systems going back decades, but 4 years of research that have come up with real numbers that the American voter understands. They understand paying $750 in taxes when they pay more than that. They understand not paying for 10 years when they pay year by year. So Biden doesn't need to interpret this for the voters. The voters are voting already. In my state of Arizona, ballots come out next week. For Americans abroad, ballots came out September 19th. Millions of Americans abroad can vote, and they are voting already. And if you don't have your ballot yet, go to votefromabroad.org to help you get it. Or answer any voting questions. But we are voting, and we're voting on what we can see, what is reality, not myth. This is showing us some real facts of what he's been saying to the IRS, which is different than what he's been saying to the American public throughout his candidacy and throughout his presidency. And the trust factor is just eroding under this president. And people are going to go to the ballot box based on whether they trust him or not. And they're not trusting him for very good reasons.
And Jeffrey, as you say, you're not a Trump partisan, but you do advocate for his right to keep his own tax affairs secret. But shouldn't Americans and voters be entitled to know if their president is using and abusing the tax code, as the New York Times alleges, when millions of Americans are expected to pay their fair share?
Right. I am not a tax attorney, but I didn't spot anything that I read in that article that sounded like abuse. It just sounded like use. And most Americans would like to pay far fewer taxes than they are paying. To tell you the truth, Oscar, and this is just a fact, I'm sorry to report it to you, but Americans in their hearts are tax rebels. I mean, we've been this way for a few hundred years. And so, I don't think, honestly, that this is going to hurt Trump. I really don't. And I don't even think he's worried about it. Now, the idea of criminal, penalties he's got to pay $100 million in taxes back. That's probably worrisome for the Trump business. But in terms of the political effects, I'm glad to make a prediction for you right now on the show that I don't think it's going to hurt him even slightly. Okay, well, let's see if and how this does impact his chances. Jeffrey Tucker in Massachusetts and Kathryn Solon in Arizona, thank you as always.